Welcome. My name is Irene Hongping Shen, and I work with trade unions for energy democracy at the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies. TUED is acting as a coordinating body for the Global Trade Union Assembly. I would like to thank the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung New York office for their support in ensuring that we have the needed interpretation for these global meetings. I want to review the interpretation instructions. For today's event, there is interpretation in English, French, Korean, Portuguese, and Spanish. Please click on the interpretation icon and select the language channel you need. English speakers, please go into the English room. A reminder to all speakers to speak slowly and clearly so the interpreters can interpret into other languages. Also, attendees, please use the Q&A function shown on your screen to type in a question or a comment, to respond to each other's questions and comments, or to like questions with the thumb icon. Speakers will not be answering questions during today's event, but we will post some of today's questions and comments from the Q&A thread onto the website, so anyone can respond after today's program. You will see the website link posted in the chat where people's questions and comments are being posted from each of the GTUA sessions. During this part of the program, organizers will use the chat box to post information related to the program. So please look for links and resources and information in the chat box. Thank you, everyone. I will now give the floor to Cornelia Berger, Policy Officer at UNI Global Union.
Okay, I hope you can all hear me.
Cornelia, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Hello?
Hello? Oh, there we go. Great.
Okay. Okay, dear colleagues, comrades, brothers and sisters from all around the world, welcome to the first thematic session on the Global Trade Union Assembly on defending and restoring vital public services, health, education, post and transport. I'm happy so many of you found their way to this discussion today. We agreed to begin with the acknowledgement of land, a tradition from social movements in Anglo-settled countries, acknowledging the tradition, the traditional owners of the land and the legacy of colonialism. Most of us gathered here are marked by a system of colonialism that is still in force in many parts of the world. It is therefore important that we take time to reflect on the harm that many people have suffered from this system, while others have benefited from it. As we begin this gathering, let us acknowledge that the land from which you are participating may be unsurrendered indigenous land, taken by colonial powers. Let us honor all indigenous people who are the traditional guardians of the land and traditional knowledge keepers. It is the responsibility of all of us here to actively participate in dismantling ongoing colonial practices. We must strive to question, consider, and work to change those facets of our society that continue to harm indigenous peoples and the traditional land upon which we live and work. And we remind ourselves that we all have a responsibility to participate in the decolonialization of land and society, to ensure that we dismantle systematic racism and other systems of oppression. We also look to indigenous people for guidance in helping to heal our relationship with land, water, forests, and each other. Dear colleagues, comrades, brothers and sisters, during this pandemic, the importance of public services was evident. Public services like health services, public transport, postal services, or garbage collection have been declared as essential services. Public service workers were at the forefront during this crisis, risking their lives every day. It shows public services play an essential role in times of crisis to ensure our society keeps on running and nobody gets left behind. It provides services outside of any profit logic, but for everybody. People have acknowledged the work public service workers are providing, and in many countries they applauded them every evening. Nevertheless, public services are under attack. In fact, many of them are not public anymore, and governments, political leaders, and stakeholders attempt to downsize, privatize, or cut public services. Therefore, discussions like today are important. We need to use the momentum and we need to use the support of the population to fight now to defend and restore vital public services. Public services guarantee social inclusion. They are an instrument of democracy. They provide sustainable jobs of the future and contribute to the just transition. We need to fight for renationalization and make public services serving people again, bringing forward our society, defined and controlled by our society, by the many and not the few. A group of unionists from all over the world and from many international trade union federations such as PSI, ITF, UNI, CUPE, CUPW, CTA, KPTU, PCS, and ATU have come together to prepare the session of today. Over the last months and weeks, we discussed a lot in our preparatory meeting on how COVID has impacted public services, but also how public services should look like in the future. It was a very intense and motivated work with a lot of strategic discussions, and I would like to thank all members of the preparation team for the hard work they have done. For today, we prepared a program which hopefully finds your interest, including all the results of the survey we have sent out beforehand. And I would like also to thank all participants of today who have filled it out and contributed to it. The results will be presented later today. We also prepared a draft joint statement reflecting the discussions we had. I think Lala will share the link now in the chat, and we invite you to send your comments and thoughts, and there will be also a poll at the end of the discussion to vote on it. And we tried to design a program today which provides input, ideas, and important topics to our discussion. There are two sessions planned for today. The first session will be a general discussion with experts on public services. And the second session will provide you with a sectorial input from national level. We hope the program of today will help you in your fights for strong and sustainable public services at national level. Now it is up to all of you to join the discussion today, and I invite you to contribute in the Q&A box and to take new ideas and arguments with you as much as possible. Finally, I would like to thank the team of the TUED as well as all the convening unions. The TUED team has attended and supported all preparatory meetings, and believe me, it was a lot. And they tried to support us in every means. They made this discussion possible today. So thank you very much for your hard work. And with this, I would like to pass over to my team to start the video, and to Wolfsan to chair the first session. Once again, thanks to everybody who was involved in preparing this meeting, and thank all of you for participating this discussion today. Together we can make a difference, and together we can defend and restore our public services. Thank you.
Thank you, Cornelia. Greetings from South Korea. My name is Bosan Lim, and I'm working with both the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union, as well as right now the International Trade Union Transport Workers Federation. KPT is also a member of Public Services International. So I'm charged with moderating this first part of our session, the first panel, which is entitled Global Movement to Reclaim Public Services. We have 3 speakers who will look at the global context of fights for and a lot of success in winning renationalization, remunicipalization, the strengthening of public services, and also fighting to strengthen their role in society. Before I go to the panel and introduce the speakers to you, I want to do what Cornelia mentioned, which is share with you the results of the survey that we sent out to participants on this call before, in the lead up to the session. So I'll try to do that very quickly. I'm going to share my screen.
Wilson, can you move your mic a little bit lower, closer to your mouth? Great, thank you.
That, yeah. How's that?
Excellent, great.
Okay, good. So I will go through this very quickly. Briefly, I think you most will have seen the survey by now. We sent this out several weeks ago to everybody registered for this session, and we were looking at the opportunities that are existing in your countries and contexts for reclaiming public services, which in our definition is very broad, and it means anything from movements to remunicipalize, renationalize, insource, or strengthen existing public services or create new ones. And so just very briefly, respondents came from around the world. The most 33% from Central and Latin America. Only one of those is from Mexico, so mostly from South America, but also from, as you can see, every other region in the world. We're actually somewhat underrepresented, I think, in North America, obviously Oceania. Part of this may have to do with timing, the timing of the calls. So the first question we asked is, do you see, after the beginning of the COVID pandemic, are you seeing new opportunities for reclaiming and strengthening public services? 65% of the respondents answered yes, and 35 said no. I will note that this is, of course, not a scientific survey. And so some countries, for example, our Argentinian comrades really did a good job in responding. So we have more answers from Argentina than we have from other countries. So it's not scientific, but it's a good sense of how the participants in this session are looking at the moment in terms of the opportunity for reclaiming public services going on. We asked, what sectors do you see these opportunities in? And I think you probably will expect that healthcare was the largest. So it was possible to choose more than one answer in this question. There were a total of 249 single answers. 29 people did not respond to this question, which means that's roughly the 35% of people who said there were no opportunities, I think. But so we see out of 130 respondents, 42 saying there is an opportunity to strengthen services in healthcare, and then between 15, 20, 25 in most of the other sectors. The ones at the top, community services, school cleaning, agriculture, were write-ins. So that's important. And then going on, we asked what types of opportunities you see. And so again, it was possible to answer more than once on this question. There were 213 positive answers, 14 people said none of the above. And this is interesting. So the answer, more than 50% of respondents said that they see a strengthened role for public services in government policy. A fair number see actual renationalization, remunicipalization, and insourcing already going on. Almost 50%, so almost 50 respondents said expansion of public funding. And I think that obviously, as you can see, almost 30 answers for new efforts to address the climate crisis. Interestingly, new forms of democratic governance of public services got quite a high score, and particularly so did the increased role of unions. So one of the opportunities that you all are seeing is that our unions are actually stronger and taking a more active role, intervening in fighting for public services, but also in how they're operated and who they're for. So I think that's important. This just gives a rough overview of where we are from a, albeit positive kind of perspective, because I think some people wrote in, really, there are no opportunities, and in fact, we're under more of an attack after COVID than before, and that's important to acknowledge as well. So that's the overview of the survey. I am now going to go on to the panel and introduce our speakers. They are here. The first panel, as I said, is entitled Global Movement to Reclaim Public Services, and we have three speakers. Daniel Chavez, who is working with the Transnational Institute, Hugo Godoy, who is the Secretary General of the Association of State Workers and Deputy General Secretary for the Centro de Trabajadores de la Argentina Autónoma, and Chaejin Sik, who is the President of the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. And before I go to you, Danielle, I will just say you each have 12 minutes. I will jump in and tell you at 10. I can only do that verbally, so that's how I'll do it. And then I will cut you off at 12. So try to please keep the time. Thank you.
Okay, I guess my time is running. Yo voy a hablar en español.
I will be speaking in Spanish. My name is Daniel Chavez. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. I am speaking from the Alps, and the Austrian Alps, and internet here is pretty lousy, so I hope you can hear me well. I don't know if you can see the screen. Can you see it correctly? The title of my presentation is Returning to the Public, Management in the World, and this new world economy. And return, I'm not saying that public part has actually left, but what we see is a new kind of discussion, as we're going to see in a few minutes. Before starting, I think it's important to say where it is that I'm speaking from, which is my point of view, because I do not belong to a union. Well, I am a member of a union, actually, but I am not speaking on behalf of a union, but on behalf of a research center that works with unions and popular organizations of this kind. It's the Transnational Institute, which is in Austria. We have been working on public services for a while, mainly regarding essential services such as water and energy. We have also done research regarding remunicipalization, and together with the SI and other unions, we have organized a series of studies regarding remunicipalization and renationalization of transport around the world, and a world conference that we did in Amsterdam last year, and that created the book that you can see here. I'm showing this to you if you happen to be interested in seeing these publications, since I just have 10 minutes, and all of this can be downloaded from our webpage. On a personal level, I have been working on public companies for a while. I coordinate a research network in Latin America, I am also part of the municipal service that is another research network that is mainly focused on water, health, and energy services. This is a publication we did last year, and in the last years I've been working on energy mainly. Going inside the subject, I believe that it is interesting to consider that the discussion regarding public management and propriety has been developing for a while, for many years so far. Here I'm showing the covers of a few magazines that can show you how the kind of discussion has changed between what is public in the last year. In January 2012, The Economist, which is one of the main speakers for neoliberalism at a world level, published a special number, which was very critical, regarding state companies, showing that public property is fundamental in many countries and that it represented a great part of the companies in different countries of the world, especially in Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And The Economy saw public property as a threat to world economy. But that was questioned by many people, including all of us. And in 2019, a very different magazine, The New Internationalist, published a special number saying that we are going back to public ownership, which is re-emerging in different countries. Because by then, many possessions were going back to the national parts in different parts of the world. But it was also recognized that in many countries there was still a very hostile climate to the public ownership. But the real discussion on this return to the public ownership started with this pandemic. For instance, in March this year, The Economist, the magazine I was mentioning before, published an editorial saying that there was an expansion of the government role that was necessary during any crisis because it was fundamental to combat the pandemic, but it was fundamental to think of how to reduce the state when it is no longer necessary. So nothing amazing considering that this is The Economist. But at the same time, there was another publication, an English publication, in a kind of different ideological line, The Guardian, was also highlighting how public ownership is returning, saying that we're going back to the great government era and that the return of the state, which seemed impossible in many countries in December 2019, was now something coherent considering the economic devastation caused by the pandemic, which had made obsolete the economic orthodoxies of previous decades. Regarding the academy, there's also a new discussion regarding public. By the end of the 90s, just a few of us were seriously researching the subject, but in the last 10 years, there have come many books and articles that have focused on this. For instance, I would recommend Andrew Cumbert, a British researcher, where he proposes a new kind of discussion regarding public ownership, specifically in the UK and in Europe, but with some arguments that have universal validity. Then we can also see, as an example, another publication that was published in Brazil 2 years ago, where we can see several known names like Mariana Mazzucato, Stiglitz, etc., who also celebrate the return of the estate in the 21st century. And more recently, there's been the publication of a work that I would recommend everyone to read, done by CDA Network, working on this subject, where they do an inventory of the different remunicipalization processes and renationalization at an international level, proposing a new kind of discussion on these subjects. And this kind of discussion is not amazing for those of us who have been working with the unions, because we didn't not only know about the liberalization, privatization, deregulation were wrong strategies. But in the last years, we have accrued more research which empirically show that market strategies in free competence have failed and have not fulfilled their promises. For instance, this is the cover of a publication from the PSI network regarding electrical energy, but with affirmations that can be extended to other public services as well. And the interesting thing is that regarding the institution of development, or in theory, development as the World Bank, the narrative is also changing regarding the public sector. And in the subject that we were working, which is that of the electric industry, last year they published a very important book where it is recognized that the traditional model of privatization that the World Bank had recommended for several years had failed. Regarding data, returning to the CDA publication, we can see that there are more than 300,000 state companies in the world with different degrees of intervention of the state in propriety or in management and at different institutional levels. At a world economy level, we can see that 1 out of 4 main big corporations are state companies. Unfortunately, many of these companies, including public service companies, when they are expanded beyond their borders, many times they behave as many other transnational without making a distinction between public and private. But regarding public property, we can see how the state is a fundamental factor. We can also see data from the OECD showing how that they have about 30 million people employed, and at a world level, more than 60 million world people work in public companies. We can also see a different discussion regarding public ownership. Most of you are going to recognize this person here. She's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, one of the most known people of what can be called the left hand of the Democratic Party in the US, and she's one of the main people working for the Green New Deal, including public property as an essential mechanism. And this should not be surprising, because many times we can see the US as the mecca of capitalism and free market, but as has been shown in a recent investigation by Thomas Hanna, in the US, supposedly the heart of the most extreme capitalism, there is a big history of public ownership companies which are efficient. In Europe, we also had many discussions regarding the public ownership during the last elections in the UK, because there was a new figure, Jeremy Corbyn. I'm sure that many of you were involved in this campaign or were inspired by Corbyn's campaign. And regarding the discussion that we're interested on, he would propose a new model for the 21st century that would be more efficient, more sustainable, and with a greater citizen control.
I'm giving you 2 minutes.
And the interesting thing is that all of this generated new proposals. The Labour Party in the UK reflected about public ownership, and in my case, coming from Latin America, I would say this is way more to the left than what is on the left in Latin America. And to finish, I would like to talk about some threats and challenges. Regarding threats, we can see there's a new wave of privatization. We can see many examples in Latin America, which is the region I come from, where we have a new opening to private capital in many essential services. Then another threat is corporatization of public companies that are formally belonging to the state, but they usually behave as private companies, incorporated models, management models that come from private capital. Another thing that has to do with this is the externalization of services, internalization of work. And we also have the very complicated subject of the free commerce treaties and investment protections that restrict the possibility of expanding public companies. To finish, I would like to speak about some opportunities. In many countries, there are new public companies. Here, I would like to mention the example of those companies that belong to the state regarding electricity in many countries. We also question the model of the new public management that is not a new thing, of course, but it is no longer public either, trying to develop alternative proposals. Some of us also with Glaxo, the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, we're trying to get new courses for the coming generation of the public sector. And we can also see a convergence of unions, environmental societies, and progressive groups that are trying not only to resist to this privatization, but also trying to develop models, proposals, strategies that can help reconstruct and rebuild the public ownership. This is something we are working on in South Africa with TUD, with GTUA, where we're developing the recovery of Eskom, which is one of the big state companies that dedicate to the industry. Well, I think I'm done with my 12 minutes. I'm finished. So that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Can I ask you to stop sharing your screen? And as you do that,
I'm trying,
I will
but
go on and introduce the next speaker. Thank you for that broad overview in a very short
I cannot stop
amount of
sharing
time.
because my
I know it's not fair to only give you 2 minutes. I think you gave us a really good picture of the way in which public ownership is in some ways becoming mainstream in over the last decade, but also with particularly within the context of the pandemic, and that there are different trends within that mainstream of public ownership, some perhaps on the right, and some efforts like the ones that you're engaged in at TNI and other organizations to put forward a left vision. What we're going to do now is go on to 2 speakers representing industrial and national unions, one in Argentina and the other in Korea, to talk about the strategies, models, and proposals that we in the trade union movement on the left are putting forward for reclaiming public services and public ownership. So to start, we have Hugo Godoy, who is, as I said before, the Secretary General of the ATE in Argentina, the Association of State Workers, and also Deputy General Secretary of the CTA Autónoma. Brother Hugo, please go ahead.
Buenos días, desde acá desde Argentina.
Good morning from Argentina.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. Greeting for everybody taking part in this event, especially the promoters and organizers of this World Union Assembly. So important in this moment to think and to find ways to face these challenges that are in front of us. The COVID-19 is a pandemic that came a step after a social systemic economic crisis in the capitalistic system, and which is here to make things even worse. But we must be aware of the main reason of the crisis that we're suffering worldwide, which is related to the dominant system of the capitalist model. And maybe the biggest challenge that we face as working class is to think, imagine, propose alternatives that allow a different method for socialization. Because the capitalist system has brought us into a humanitarian crisis that is absurdly huge, unimaginable, soon before, where we see at a global level different states of development living together, and as Cornelia mentioned before, many of our countries live in a colonized state. So the fight for sovereignty of these countries, these peoples, is still at the core of the goals and the needs that we as peoples and as working class have. In this framework, there is no doubt that the pandemic of COVID has increased this crisis and made it worse. So, as it gives us alternatives to build and think new options, it also reinforces the authoritarian mechanisms that belong to a repressive capitalist system. So we need to find a way to see how the role of the states can emancipate and free and promote the social forces so that we, the peoples and the workers who generate the wealth, that in a repressive dimension and controller is currently being sought by those groups who want to have control in this capitalist system, and this imposition that is all around our world. And this crisis has come also to show us that the globalization model handled by transnational private companies is also questioned, and there is a positive piece of information: the interstate fights regarding the new ways of incidence in the world economies of the big powers, but also opens new paths to recover the sovereign role of the government, the state, a situation which had been questioned and put in a crisis situation by the neoliberal models that since the 90s have been attacking humanity more and more. In our case, in Argentina, our trade workers union was born during this decade, the 90s, facing the policies which came from their origin in the genocide dictatorships that were present during the 70s and in the 80s by the neoliberal models. In the 90s, there was a biggest deepening in the democratic life of this. So there was a big dismantling of the national states, of the public saving, generated by different generations through the consolidation of public companies run by the government and the state. During the last 4 years, this was tried to be reestablished by a neoliberal government of an ex-president which has now fled from our country, Macri, who was removed from office by the democratic elections. And in this moment, in our country and in big part of the region, there is an intention of trying to recover the role of the state in a liberating and deepening of the democracy sense, because there is no way, the way we understand, to strengthen the role of the state truly in a freedom kind of way, in a liberation, if there is no strengthening of the organizations by the people, especially by the working class. In the 90s, in our countries, we understand that maybe this will happen again. Not only there was room for a debate about the state's role, but also the intervention possibilities of the organized working class in the economic and social life. The economic crisis, the big recession, closed many factories, and our people in the 90s in Argentina was able to generate a moment of organization of recovered companies and independent workers who took over the administration and the production of these companies. Therefore, we understand that it is necessary to see that the state must be more democratic and more popular, and for this we need a new type of union organization that explains these new ways of organization and intervention by the organized working class, fighting to recover bankrupt companies, fighting hunger and poverty, which gave room to a new room of organizations working both in the fields, in the farms, the family agriculture, the small producers, as well as in the city through the developing of cooperative organizations, independent work, and the synergy with different national companies. The strengthening of what we call a new union model, as we call it, and an open and democratized state is what will enable this new reality about the importance of the state and the companies that are managed by the state in the world economy situation, and the resignification that is acquired where the national sovereignties as well as the popular sovereignties are recovered, working against totalitarian and repressive governments, which also indicates the possibility that the workers have in order to have an influence in a new model of public companies. We believe that this necessarily requires the participation of the state and the participation of the workers as a main factor in the organization of the everyday strategies of the companies, but also the users and consumers that enable mechanisms of social control of the way these new public companies work that we have to develop. Fundamentally, regarding energy and scientific technological development, because there are some areas, and this has been proved during this health emergency, the very big importance of health, education, the water regulation as a central core element for health, Two more minutes. The movements regarding energy production and the scientific technological development. We understand that the role of the state in this time has been of a big intervention, but not like it happened in 2008, where the resources of the state were used to save the banking system, which is the great generator of the financing that led us all to this crisis, but in a sense of investment in the productive development and intervention in a strategic way by the state for production, work, sovereignty, and popular national sovereignty. in front of these opportunities, the organization of the working classes, regionally, national, and internationally speaking, is fundamental. So we understand that this assembly must incorporate new ways of organizations of national and global level by workers, and they are a fundamental contribution searching new paradigms for a new way of socialization different to the capitalist system. Thank you very much, and congratulations for the high level of intervention here.
That was amazing. First of all, it was amazing because you ended at 11 minutes and 59.98 seconds, which is exactly on time. Thank you very much. And also because the level of thought that went into that intervention around the need to democratize the state as a precursor or a condition for democratizing public services, reclaiming workers taking control of failing companies, and the interaction between the financial sector and other socially productive parts of the economy was really amazing. I think fits well with the overview that Daniel gave us as well. And also, I will note that there's a discussion going on, the question and answers right now, about the statement we will get to at the end, which picks up some of these themes, particularly the need to deal with worker control, both in the public and the private sector. So I think that these discussions are starting to come together. Thank you very much for that rich intervention. I'm going to go now to the last speaker of this panel, who is Choi Jun-sik, who is the president of the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union, who will speak about COVID in South Korea and the fight for strengthening public services here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Choi Jun-sik. I'm from KPTU. And this is a very important moment when trade unions from all around the world have to stand in solidarity to and I am very happy to be part of that effort at this very important moment and participating in the Global Trade Union Assembly. And I am very particularly happy to meet our brothers and sisters from CTAA ATE. Currently, the pandemic, the corona pandemic, has magnified the underlying disease that we have all been suffering from, that is the structural crisis of the capitalist system. And we are very much aware of the direct cause of the structural crisis, capitalist crisis that we are all facing, especially in Korea, where we are very export dependent as well as foreign capital dependent. And so the underlying disease of structural capitalist crisis has spread, and it has become much more serious because of the pandemic. But if we do not respond to this fundamental from a fundamental level, we will not be able to come up with alternatives or make much of a difference. So some of the things that we are doing would be calling for placing precarious workers as well as the poor and the marginalized at the top priority in social and public funding. And the KPTU for the past 20 years have had a lot of experience in fighting of the privatization offensive on energy, rail, healthcare, post services, and other public services. And so we have succeeded partially and also succeeded in winning the public support in fighting off privatization. So as a result, and thanks in part to such efforts, the rail as well as energy still remains a public service in Korea. And we also have universal public health insurance and pension. But we still have a long way to go in strengthening social and public nature of public services. And there's always the threat of private companies intervening into the public sector, and some public essential services are being provided at a very low level. And all these vulnerabilities that have continued to exist have become more exposed because of the pandemic. The percentage of beds in public hospitals, for example, is only 10%, which is 1/7 of the OECD average. And the human resources in the public health sector is only half of the OECD average. So we are calling for 30 expansion of the proportion of public hospital beds to 30%, and also the establishment of a new public hospital specializing in infectious diseases. And also we are calling for the establishment of a national public health university, and also providing more social caregiving services to the elderly, the disabled, and to children. And we also are calling for more government funding for platform workers, specially employed workers, irregular workers, and self-employed micro business owners. And we are asking for more allowances and state funding for and also employment insurance as well as social insurance for such workers. The KPTU has been very aggressive and almost militaristic in our struggle against privatization. But if we just keep to our old methods and old strategies, we will not be able to make much of a difference or fight off privatization effectively, or to help the people who are most vulnerable in the time of this pandemic. So we have to use this crisis as an opportunity for social transformation, and we have to not focus on the vested interests our vested interests at the enterprise level. We have to call for social transformation and work for the interests of all workers, for everyone in the working class, rather than focusing on the vested interests at each of our own companies. So we have to be people-oriented, and we have to work for and struggle for the interests of the public as workers in the public sector. And to this end, to achieve this goal, we have agreed to place this issue at the top of our agenda at the General Assembly, where we will have the vote of all our union members. And we are currently holding talks, teach-ins, discussions, and training sessions to educate our membership. And so what we need is a fundamentally different approach in order to protect the people and to protect and reclaim public services. So actually, what we have before us is an unprecedentedly difficult challenge. And we have a very ambitious goal that we have set for ourselves, but we know that the crisis is a very huge one right now, and we need to have a fundamentally different approach in order to achieve our goal. And when it comes to international solidarity, which we need now more than ever, we cannot confidently say that we have a clear global strategy. So we have to, first of all, admit that what we lack, and we also have an opportunity before us because of the pandemic. More workers, more trade union members are agreeing to the same tasks and the same goals. And so we have the basis and to bring our minds together. And I think we have the foundation for such international solidarity. We do have that experience at the KBTU. For example, we attended the Congress of Trade Unions in the Global South when it was opened in Argentina. We attended that event, and we also participated in the discussion of the challenges facing the public sector and the regularization of irregular workers. And also in 2016, we worked with the Canadian Union of Public Employees, CUPE, and actually the CUPE members came to support our general strike to block or stop the performance-linked bonus system. And we also attended the training session held by the CUPE on people education, on the role of the public sector and how it can be transformed. And we are also inspired today by the campaign or the social movement, Black Lives Matter. We don't see this as just a cultural movement. It is a movement that is calling for cuts to public funding of oppressive state mechanisms and the expansion of funding for essential public services to protect the vulnerable people and promote equality and solidarity among all peoples. And I think this is a goal that is shared by this event, the Global Trade Union Assembly. So I believe that this Black Lives Matter movement is very, very precious and very important. And it should run in parallel with, and we should build solidarity with this movement. And I was very particularly inspired by the participation of trade unionists in that movement. And I hope that we will be able to produce good ideas to really, truly reclaim public services and protect public services. Once again, a big thank you to all of you from Korea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, today. My president left me 4 minutes. He only used 8. So you give me a little bit of time to wrap up, which is great. So I think we've just had a really intense discussion, intense presentations within a short amount of time. The discussion started with an overview of the way in which discussions of state intervention and of public ownership are becoming in some ways more mainstream, definitely within the context of the COVID pandemic, but also within the last decade. Of course, this is not to say that there aren't continued attacks by private capital and international financial institutions on the public sector, but there's this new discourse around public ownership. We noted that public ownership is not necessarily a progressive form of public ownership. Going to Comrade Hugo's presentation, he spoke about the need to democratize the state and for a democratized state to support public ownership with workers' control, and the need to transform our unions to be able to take over key industries and failing companies, and to win investment in a form of social value and social development. And then finally, we came to Korea, where KBT President Choi spoke about the effort of KBTU to have a union-wide discussion and then a union-wide membership vote about our role as a union, not in individual workplaces, but as a whole organization, a working class, if you were, to intervene socially to win the strengthening of public services, particularly healthcare, and others for in order to protect the most vulnerable and to win a more just and equal society. So that is the discussion that we've had so far. And it's a lot to think about. While that was going on, there's been a dialogue in the question and answer box about our final statement, general support for it, but also really bringing up this question of, what do we need to do to strengthen worker control, not only in the public sector, but in the private sector as well. And so I will, when I see you at the end of this session, I will come back and try to give you a proposal about how we are going to deal with that going forward. That's it for panel one. Thank you very much to the presenters. I will ask you to stay around and look at the question and answer chat that's going on. If there are questions that you can answer, please answer them yourselves. Otherwise, these questions will be a continued dialogue on the Global Trade Union Assembly website. I'm going to conclude my session. Thank you, everybody. And now I will pass the mic over to my colleague Kelty in Canada.
Thank you, Wilson. Can I get a thumbs up, Wilson? Can you hear me? Oh, you're gone. Okay.
You sound good, Kelty.
Thank you. Okay, so thanks, Wilson, and thanks to the panelists for your excellent, excellent presentations and for laying a really sound foundation for this next session. My name's Kelty Cameron. I'm the International Solidarity Staff Person at the Canadian Union of Public Employees. And I'm really pleased to be introducing to you our speakers for the second part of this webinar, which is entitled Sector Opportunities and Strategies. In this session, we're going to delve more deeply into some of the sector-specific strategies that different unions are using to position the role and also the expansion of public services as central to the COVID recovery. But I think equally important and maybe most interestingly, they're also going to share with us some concrete examples of how we as trade unionists, as the working class, can re-envision the role of public services and also develop strategies for achieving this vision. So we're going to be hearing from leaders from the health, education, transport, and post sectors. Speakers will have 10 minutes each. And if speakers could also note that I will be giving you a 2-minute warning in advance. And time is tight, so I'm really going to keep my comments to a minimum to make sure that we maximize the time for our speakers and leaders. So we're going to start with the health sector. So let's see, do we have our panelists here? Yes, I see them here. So I'd like to introduce to you two speakers. One is Nayarit Quevedo from the Public Service International she's the sub-regional secretary for the Southern Cone. And she's going to be interviewing Carolina Espinoza, who's the national leader of the National Confederation of Municipal and Health Officials in Chile. And she's also the vice president of the PSI Regional Women's Committee. And they're both going to be speaking in Spanish. So please take it away. Go ahead, and I'll give you a 2-minute warning.
Hello. Thank you very much, Katie, for your introduction. A greeting to everybody taking part in this event in a way to restore the important essential public services such as health and education. I am here going to work as an interviewing moderator. She's a president of the organization in Chile, but also Carolina is Vice President of the Women's Committee of the Public Services in the region, which is very important. And she seeks the prediction that the provision system goes back to state and does not continue in the private hands, such as is happening right now in our country. I would like to begin with Carolina. Chile is the most neoliberal country in the world, where most of the public services are privatized. And one of the reasons for this mercantilization of life provoked a social outburst in the country in 2019, and this is not related to the COVID. And I would like to ask Carolina why or how the definancing and the lack of investment in the health sector in Chile has impacted in this pandemic. And what have the unions done in order to protect the workers and the patients? Welcome, Carolina. Hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. First, I would like to greet this World Assembly and to recognize that in these crisis times, this appropriation of the networks is making it easier for us to work together, this world joint action that we need for the transformation. I would like to show you that effectively in Chile, with 18 million inhabitants, we have approximately 400,000 infections and 40,000 deaths, and with that, Chile is one of the Latin American countries with the highest infection rate, and we are in the first 10 positions in worldwide regarding the number of deaths per million of inhabitants in this cruel pandemic. However, since the origin of the public system of health in 1991, based on the British system, in a politics that impacted positively in the community, but after the dictatorship, the military dictatorship, there was in the beginning of a neoliberal lab applying adjustments, structural adjustments designed by international financing systems, promoting the free market and therefore provoking this predator system with very bad socioeconomic and environmental consequences. There was a problem for the private insurance, ISAPRE, and these helped just a 15% privileged social group. And during the dictatorship, there was a squeeze, financially speaking, in the public health system, which was basically destroyed. When we had the democracy with an expectation of change that actually didn't go through because this model was perfectioned and deepened, actually. We were in a paradox that even if the last few years the tax contributions to health have increased because of the problems in the infrastructure, then millions are transferred to the market of health, which is a very concentrated industry which develops mostly with their own clinics, insurance, labs, and pharmacies. In this context, then the pandemic, so bad, so cruel, has come to reveal the fallacies of this supposedly successful Chilean system. And with this Piñera government, the businessmen and the businesses' interests have been increased, and they have put in first before the people. And there has been a bad management with an obscene show of the late offer of health and economic assistance to the society. This government is responsible for a catastrophe that we are suffering nowadays in our country. Besides all that, we have articulated with the different unions, the professional schools, the scientific associations, and the users of health
we have been able to put pressure so that there are new health policies, so that we have quarantines in Chile, actions for detection and track of cases, and we have tried to make the numbers and the figures more transparent regarding the infections and deaths. We have campaigned in order to defend ourselves as public servants, working in a campaign of workers that are protected. We can save lives. So in order to report in our own statistics how this pandemic has affected the health personnel, which has suffered many casualties, unfortunately. We must say that we are working for the defense of water. In Chile, besides we have many sources of water, we suffer scarcity, especially in rural areas, where this is a vital element, and this is because of the privatization. Nowadays, water in Chile is private and is part of the market, so this affects the most elemental ways of life for people. This neoliberal, wild model imposed in a dictatorship has created a big damage for the population, or the majority of the population, jeopardizing the human rights and health and water have been affected. Therefore, in this moment, as my colleagues have said before, it's evident that we are in an inflection point, and we are at a risk of going back, or maybe to reposition the need for a new normal, where through fiscal justice, for example, we might be able to have efficient public services, which are those who are supposed to provide the human rights to our society. That's it. Thank you, Carolina. Next, October 25, there will be a plebiscite in Chile in order to pass and replace the Pinochet's constitution of 1980, which many have considered as the institutional basis for the privatization of the public services, in special regarding health and privatization and the ownership of water and all those things you have just mentioned. In that sense, how do you believe that a new constitution for the Chileans can improve the access to public services and deepen the democracy in your country?
Interject, you have 2 minutes.
Absolutely. There's great inequality, there's a horrible tax system in a model that is being held within a judiciary system created by dictatorship, where the political area gives privilege to everything that has to do with private property above the most fundamental rights of the population. It is a legislative system, work system, where there is not enough development for the worker associations. This means that there's a wide variety of injustices that actually explain why this October 18th, finally Chile woke up. It woke up against so much injustice and unfair use. And we have started the wonderful process that gives a lot of hope. And it is not over for us. In Chile, we can now understand clearly that all of this revendication that was moving us separately, the request for salaries, the request for public free education, the private pension system, the fight for feminism, the fight for water, these have all become demands that are showing one single problem. That is this neoliberal problem, the political constitution, the dictatorship in Chile that has to be ended to generate democratic systems, widening this limited democracy that we have, and so that we can move forward to the liberational new Chile. That is what we need to have new position for public services, such as the provisional institutions that give warranties for a good life. Now we are living a big debate respect of a model that we want to build so as to give central place to public services and have a greater life quality and, of course, to have better democracy in our country. Thank you very much, Carolina. So now the word to Katie. You can continue moderating the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. And thank you so much for sharing the piece of the struggle in Chile. I know the world has been watching and expressing a lot of solidarity, certainly over the years and certainly very much so in recent months and years. So thank you again. We're now going to receive a presentation from the education sector. I'm very pleased to introduce Edwin Morales, who is the Vice President of the Teachers Federation of Puerto Rico. Edwin's going to be speaking to us in Spanish. So please go ahead, Edwin.
Hello, my warm regards to all of you, comrades who are here in this so important forum that is looking for solidarity in this capitalistic crisis and the public health crisis that most of us are living in our countries. In our case, well, we have to discuss a little bit about how this pandemic, in the case of Puerto Rico, has shown clearly the collapse of all of the institutions in the country. And this is a model that is clearly neoliberal, that has been building for decades, regarding our, of course, relationship with the US. And in the case of Puerto Rico in particular, in the education area, it has not been any different. What we have seen is the failure of the educational reform. It's an educational reform that was imposed as a business model, actually, to meet the needs of the private companies, disregarding our students. Yesterday, it was supposed to that classes started in the country, but 40% of the students could not connect. So this is about 116,000 students out of 282,000 students who use the public system in the country. Well, this pandemic has shown the big gap between classes, and we're not all in the same position to receive quality public education. And this is clearly shown because most of the kids do not have access to equipment, they do not have access to tools such as internet or the basic instruments that are needed to work on a situation as the one we're facing. I believe that it is really important to show that this reality that our population is living, where 75% of our students are below a poverty system in the public educational system. And it goes against this idea that about millions of dollars, which is a consolidated budget between federal and local budget, where $6,000 are given for each student in this budget. But this budget, as we have seen, does not get to students. And this has been shown by this pandemic. It has shown that there's a big crisis that is not good for the children in the country, and that it has failed in trying to create an alternative with this business vision that, of course, is being questioned by the whole country if it works and if it has to be actually transformed radically. At least in our case, the unions that we have been carrying out a big fight for many years, we can see this from two different positions. One is a strategic position where we have the need not to just transform the educational model to society that we want to have, that answers to the great majority, to workers, to the poorer sectors, but also how we are going to walk within the strategic conception. It is an immediate vision to understand which are the problems that we have and that prevent to have the right for public education to all students. And among the different proposals that we've worked with and that we've fought for during the last months, we have as a basic and essential element how it is that we can transcend from a union that fights only for the right of teachers to fighting for public education in the whole country, combining the different organizations, schools, grassroots organizations, political organizations that can be together with the workers, and to transform that in a movement for the change, a radical change in the country we live in. To give you an example of what is happening, one of the main worries that we have currently is the lack of internet access, the lack of educational modules, and how this increases this situation that we have of people getting poorer, specifically in the cultural point of view in Puerto Rico. So that is why one of the proposals that we've been working on has to do with the fight for public health in our country and how this is combined with the immediate demand. For instance, in a country where we have about 30,000 cases confirmed, we have 3 million people, 30,400 have died because of COVID. That is more than 12%. We have managed to stop the starting of school, looking after the health of people, workers and students, because they are doing it online. One of the things we have done is to do massive testings, the reduction to 12 students or less per classroom, free internet, which is now privatized in our country. We want free internet for students so that students and teachers can have that. Reopening closed schools, because we closed more than 300 schools not more than 2 years ago because of the neoliberal adjustment that, of course, had a big impact on our youth. And having psychologists and nurses in each and every school in our country. Together with that, we are also speaking about a different set of measures that can strengthen health when we enter schools in this period, and also having a deeper discussion to a democratic model, considering that we have an educational system that starts from the industry of educational failure, with a vertical authoritarian system where communities do not participate in a democratic way to find alternatives towards the crisis we're facing. So as a product of this, we have managed to develop a campaign, different campaigns, digital campaigns, as mobilizations. We practically had to look for creative alternatives, having strikes, civil disobedience in different ways, so as to have elements that will make this reality visible in the different communities towards the media. Thanks to this, we... Thank you. Okay, and some things that are immediate, like having nurses in all of the schools in the country, getting more than 300,000 units that have not been given yet to the students of technological units and equipment. We also have psychologists that are going to go to the school, but there's still some central elements that are not being given attention to. beyond the reopening of schools and different measurements that have to do with the personalization of teaching, that has to do with the curricula and the vision that we need to have of the education on the long term. On this, of course, we can see the immediate context and the reality of what we're living now. And we know, as our comrade from Chile is saying, we are in an inflection point regarding social fights where the working class, specifically in Puerto Rico, where we had the example in the summer of 2019, where we wanted to get the Puerto Rican government, we removed him with millions of people going to the streets. We are now facing the possibility of a new paradigm of rewriting history in a different way. And I truly believe that there's space to contribute in here in considering what we can face day after day, have a regional agenda to gain greater strength. So that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you. Important comments and important perspective from your struggle. We're going to next hear from Wolsan Lim, who's the director of the International Affairs Department at the Korean Public Service and Transport Workers Union. Wolsan is also working closely with the International Transport Workers Federation. So she's going to speak obviously about the transport sector, and she's going to be speaking in English. So please go ahead.
Again, I'm back. Okay, I know that we're a little short on time, and I wanted to do a kind of global survey of the challenges and opportunity for public transport and sort of put forward a proposal about what capacities and policies public transport and other unions need to take advantage of the current moment. There's really not enough time to do that, but what I'm going to say is drawn from one of the submissions by the ITF on defending and reclaiming public transport. So please find that, and you can get the details from there, because I will probably miss a bunch of them as I go. Just to start, I wanted to stress the class character of public transport. So public transport is very clearly an issue of class. The way public transport is planned can determine if working class communities will suffer from higher levels of congestion and air pollution, putting them at high risk of illness, or if they have access to the transport they need to access medical services and employment, other public services. During the crisis, it's become evident that women, people of color, low-income workers are more highly dependent on public transport to get to work. And these are also the groups that are most represented among those who provide essential services. And that reality is something that municipal and even in some cases national governments have had to recognize in some places, which means that we see in some countries governments and transport agencies that have turned, particularly in the beginning of lockdowns, to policies that prioritize the public service and redistributive character of public transport rather than its profit-making potential. And just to give one example, in India, and I know we have comrades from AIRF on the call, in India, the long-distance trains have been mobilized to transport migrants who have no other means to return home, as well as to transport essential medical supplies and relief goods. In other countries around the world, you see free public transport being provided, sometimes definitely for medical and other essential medical staff and other essential workers, and in some cities entirely free, both because collecting fares is not safe because of the context, but then also in some cases out of recognition of public transport having an income support function. We see in places like the Philippines and South Africa, local governments are contracting with informal transport operators to provide transport for essential workers, perhaps providing a platform for future formalization of these sectors. Of course, there have also been huge challenges to public sector, public transport and public transport workers. Public transport workers have been, had disproportionate amounts of infection and death in cities like New York and London. And definitely there have been attacks on workers' rights within this context. And so I don't want to push those aside, but also important to look at the opportunities, the new opportunities arising. Another issue that we see facing public transport systems, which is both a risk and in some ways an opportunity, is massive debt that's coming from a drop in ridership. So billions and billions of losses around the world for public transport systems because of lockdowns and also because people don't want to use public transport right now because of fear of infection. Because of this, you see employers as well as unions calling for public funding for public transport. In that context, unions are also calling for remunicipalization and renationalization. In some ways, the fact that employers are calling for the same thing in this moment is an opportunity, but it's hard to see that this, it's unlikely, I think, that this alliance that is coming up in some areas between employers and unions will be more than short-lived, especially because a lot of the private sector operators that are jumping into the debate and calling for funding are private, particularly private mobility service providers, either providing like Uber-like services or mobility as a service, what's called MaaS, which is like online platforms to connect services, different like Uber-like services to public transport, for example. And so these companies are painting their own picture of green integrated mass transport, which is electrified, connected to cycling, scooters, etc., which looks really good, but this is for them a way to advance public-private partnerships and to stress the innovation and the need for the innovation of the private sector. In addition, we see government funding where it's coming with conditions, sometimes structural adjustment. This is happening in France, for example, in London. We know that there are a lot of developing countries that are getting IMF and other international financial institution support. At this time, some of that may go to public transport. We also know usually this comes with conditions that drive public-private partnerships and structural adjustment. So these are big risks that are coming with the losses that public transport systems are facing. When we talk about at the International Transport Workers Federation, when we talk about public funding for public transport, we try to talk not about immediate bailouts, but rather about sustainable long-term funding strategies, for example, taxes on employers in areas that benefit from public transport. And for the most part, I haven't found many cases where these types of more sustainable public funding are being won. One exception is Italy, where unions have been able to negotiate the refunding of a previously existing national public transport fund for local public transport, for urban transport. And this is tied to climate-related goals and based on regional equality. So it'll cover 65% of operating costs. Obviously not enough, but still moving towards in a sustainable direction. So the debate on funding is also a debate on how public transport systems should be reorganized. And the case of Italy points to the ability of unions to intervene in this space. But in order to do that, we have to have the right capacities as a labor movement together with our allies, and may be able to use, if we have those capacities, we may be able to use the moment to advance a new vision of integrated, sustainable, democratic, and class-conscious public transport, as well as to fight for and achieve it. And so I want to talk about the capacities we at ITF and hopefully KP2 as well believe that we need to advance towards this vision, this new vision of a social model of public transport.
2 minutes, Wilson.
Yep. And particularly to meet the multiple goals of public health, safety, equitable mobility, and climate justice. The ITF has developed a people's public transport policy, which puts forth a social model to meet these goals, and we're just starting to talk about what that means in the COVID era. So there are documents about this in other spaces, but just briefly, are some principles that we're putting out: safe workers, safe vehicles, safe passengers. This is summarized in the ITF charter for keeping public transport workers safe, which hopefully will go into the chat box. Public ownership and democratic control of planning and operation of public transport. This is obviously remunicipalization, or renationalization. In some cases, in the private sector, social contracting, including social conditions in contracts, as opposed to free to bailouts without conditions. Sustainable public funding, which I just discussed, addressing climate change, environmentally and worker-friendly technological change, including regulation of mobility as a service, creation of good jobs. Okay, so, and the second capacity I want to talk about is the capacity to build class-based solidarity. I have a lot of examples here, including my colleagues in the US, ATU and TWU coming together to fight for more PPE and safer conditions, also participating in support of the Black Lives Matter movement in London. Public transport unions across different occupations have come together to call for sustainable funding. In India, railway workers are working overtime to provide relief for precarious gig economy workers, as well as preparing a fight against rail privatization. So all of these campaigns demonstrate, and I'm at the end, all of these campaigns demonstrate that transport workers have the ability to take action on the basis of class solidarity rather than on the basis of individual company interests, but doing so on a sustained basis, particularly with diverse groups of transport workers, some of who stand to lose out in the process of renationalization or municipalization, modal competition, or transition to the formal economy or a climate-friendly economic system. This is not an easy task. Finding the means to build international class solidarity, as well as refining the policy demands that I put out, are projects that the ITF has taken on for the next 6 months to a year, and we want to ask all of the unions participating in this Global Trade Union Assembly to engage with us in this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson. It is unfair to give 10 minutes to lay out such an important blueprint for collective global organizing. So well done, thank you. Our final discussion is going to be about with the leaders from the postal sector. So I'm really happy to be introducing to you Cornelia Berger, who is the head of the Uni Post and Logistics Department, and she will be interviewing Jan Simpson, who is the National President of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers. They're going to be speaking in English, so please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Perfect. So I have the honor to make an interview today with Jan Simpson. She's the president of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers, representing around 65,000 postal workers in Canada. If you think about post, then it certainly doesn't appear as the most modern public service. I'm not sure when it was the last time you have sent actually a letter, but if you think about the importance of e-commerce and the parcel delivery, and moreover, if you think about the network of postal workers and post offices all around the world, then there is a clear potential for redefinition and a development of post. And CUPW has published a policy which is called Delivering Community Power. And you as CUPW, you have developed a clear vision how postal services in Canada should look like in the future. So my first question to Jen would be, COVID showed clearly we need to redefine the public services. Post must play an essential role as a community service by using its infrastructure in a broader way, by diversifying the services, and by including communities in the design and the execution of these services. And what are your strategies in CUPW in establishing a new postal service providing those services?
Thank you very much, Cornelia, for the question today. I want to welcome everybody, the panelists, as well as the participants to the GTUA event this morning. I first want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from unceded Anishinaabe territory, and I want to celebrate our Indigenous leaders fighting for justice. So I'll now answer your question, Cornelia. So as we move forward, the economy will continue to depend on deliveries and convenient services that are available to everyone. We have entire projects and plans dedicated to seeing the Canadian Postal Service change. This is where CUPW's Delivering Community Power campaign fits in. We have worked hard at developing and nurturing alliances with the public because we know they support keeping the post office public, and they also want the expansion of services. We also promote our ideas with other unions and groups, and we get involved in campaigns for social justice.
And what are the most important services for communities from your perspective?
So for us, delivering community power is about expansion of services and greening the post office. We want to implement postal banking, which we actually had in Canada until 1968, so that remote communities have access to financial services and so that the working class have non-exploitive banking options. We also want to develop a process of checking in on seniors and other vulnerable people in our society. We saw how important this was during COVID-19, as well as it happens in other countries already. And since postal workers are already known in their communities, they are well positioned to offer this service. And we also want Canada Post to transition its 13,000 vehicle fleet to electric as technically feasible, while giving the public the opportunity to charge their own electric vehicles at Canada Post charging stations, almost making the post office into a community hub. In addition, we are pushing for projects to retrofit post offices around the country to make them more efficient by conducting building retrofits to reduce their energy consumption.
And public services in general and the post in special are under attack right now. Even though they have been declared as essential services, governments are not hesitating to push for downsizing, cost cutting, or privatization. Unions must now start an offensive strategy. And now with the support of the population gained during this pandemic, we need to fight for innovative, green, democratic, future-oriented public services, providing high-quality, affordable services to everybody, independent of income, gender, or origin, and also providing good, low-carbon jobs of the future with high-income social security and career and training perspectives as jobs for the future. What is your strategy as CUPW in Canada to achieve this?
Well, we feel this pandemic has brought a lot of light to including the problems with a profit-based economy. It's also at the expense and the well-being of the workers and their families. We need to be at the forefront of insisting that positive change and new alternatives to the status quo be implemented. Rather than let giants such as Amazon benefit and profit from the exploitation of workers, we must advocate for Canada Post to be the delivery option in Canada. Canada Post is poised to set a good example to all Canadians by being at the forefront of electrifying its fleet of vehicles. Not only would this reduce the carbon footprint for Canada Post, but it would also encourage other sectors and companies to do the same. It would also create jobs within other sectors as well as keep jobs for our members at CUPW.
And how can you assure sufficient public financing for Post, and how to deal with competition in the sector?
Okay, so right now Canada Post, it's a crown corporation, so it does not receive funding from the rely on public financing, but it can be held to accountable by its shareholder, the Canadian government. The federal government has many programs in place that provide assistance to help private companies when they take environmentally conscious initiatives at their workplaces. And they do not offer these initiatives to Canada Post, but we feel they should. It could go a long way in helping Canada Post to green its operations. We also feel that delivering community power is a good option for Canada Post. With this expansion of services, it will bring more revenue, which will help it to continue to be self-sufficient. And also about the competition. So CUPW is well positioned to be the power for collective organizing and national leadership when it comes to delivering logistics. We need to challenge any competition. We recently succeeded in unionizing food courier workers in Canada. It's the first time in Canada's history that a gig economy workers have been organized. And of course, the company promptly shut down, declared bankruptcy, and moved out of Canada. This is unacceptable, but we must not let it hinder us from organizing still. We need to hold these large multinational companies accountable when it comes to the poor working conditions they impose on their workers. We have been vocal in denouncing the exploitive labor practices of companies such as Amazon. Unionizing and organizing workers is not optional, it's a must. Competition cannot be based on a race to the bottom. So CUPW has really invested, and we're continuing to invest and promote organizing of workers.
And my final question would be, we learned in the past months, strong public services and strong unions guarantee the best way out of this crisis. To prepare for the future, unions need to adapt and to educate the workers to prepare for future challenges. And they have an obligation to work closely with civil societies and communities, building up structures to include the workers as well as the population in debates about the future. Could you give us examples on how CUPW is preparing this process, and what are your organizing strategies and networks?
So at CUPW, education is very important to us. We have successfully rolled out webinars during the last month to launch our second phase of delivering community power. With over 300 people across the country participating, this gave us an opportunity to touch base with members, especially those who are particularly dedicated to or interested in the Delivering Community Power campaign. This arms us with a nucleus of members dedicated to promoting the vision, and they are able to organize meetings with elected representatives and community groups across the country. So for us, the gig economy is becoming the main work method of many workers within Canada and around the world. We have seen especially with warehouse workers who are being impacted, and there's a real need for unions to organize. CUPW opened a warehouse worker center even during COVID because we understand the challenges these workers face. The center was launched on January 19th, 2020 in Brampton, Ontario, which is in Canada. This center represents a place where unprotected workers could gather, access resources, get training, and learn about the benefits of being part of a union. Right now, we're offering virtual workshops on workers' rights, health and safety, and the information on the Canadian Relief Benefit Program, as well as employment insurance. And we look forward to, once the we can gather face-to-face, continuing the work of the Warehouse Workers Center. I encourage you to go to www.warehouseworkerscenter.ca to see more about this Warehouse Workers Centers and the activities which they offer. With our Delivering Community Power campaign, we've garnered a lot of support around the country. Our members have been key in doing a lot of the work to promote the vision of delivering community power. With this campaign, we have had the support of labor, civil society, international and national unions, community groups, political parties, our climate allies. We have many pro-labor academic and research groups as well, and also international organizations. This is a short overview of CUPW's Delivering Community Power campaign. So I encourage you to go to our website, deliveringcommunitypower.ca, and see how you can participate in delivering community power. I'll type it into the chat box, the web address, but I also, again, want to thank the GTUA and all the participants for taking time today to participate in this really important platform. And thank you, Cornelia, for the questions.
Thank you very much, Jen. And good luck for your campaign in Canada. And I would like to use my last minute probably for this sector discussion on sharing my screen with you and promoting a call for action from the APWU, from the American Postal Workers Union, to make it a little bit more lively, because here we can see at the moment that postal services and public services as such are under attack right now, and we can support them with solidarity. And today, the US Postal Unions call a day of action. As you might know, and as you might have read in the newspapers, the Trump administration is determined to weaken the public-owned post office and reduce its capacity to process millions of mail ballots before the presidential election on November 3rd. Meanwhile, the USPS is in desperate need for funding as it is impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. And the unions, our unions, are demanding that elected officials and USPS Postmaster General DeJoy provide at least $25 billion in immediate support for the postal services and to stop the mail slowdown policies introduced by the Postmaster General. The United States Postal Services is being held hostage by a government intent on doing everything in its power to block postal voting in the run up to the election and undermine a trusted, necessary institution. The Postal Service in the United States and globally is a public good and a key function of government, not a pawn in an election campaign. So I think we will share, or I will share in a minute, the link with you in the chat box and ask you to support the postal workers in the US today by printing out a sign and making a photo, sharing on social media with the hashtag Save the Post Office, sharing messages of solidarity on social media, sharing posts with the hashtag, and supporting the postal workers in their fight to keep the post public in the US. And with this, I would like to thank Jen again for your contribution and your great explanation of what's going on in Canada. And I call everybody to share photos on social media with the hashtag. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jen and Cornelia, for that excellent presentation. The link is already in the chat for those that are looking for it. So just a final thanks to all of our speakers. Excellent presentations. 10 minutes each doesn't do it justice, but it certainly has allowed us to get a much deeper understanding and sense of the struggle in your sectors, in your regions, in your unions. The critical element of this struggle to collectively resist privatization and corporate control of our society is our shared vision for a better world and our ability to strategically work together and strategize to get there. So while we of course need to recognize our own diverse political movements, histories of struggle and resistance, I thank you all for being here to help us with that important and possible task. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Wolsan, who's going to provide concluding remarks. So thank you very much, everyone.
Hi, I'm back. Okay, this is the concluding part of our session today. Just to sum up a little bit, we've heard a discussion of the challenges and opportunities for reclaiming public services from several countries on the national level and then in the sectoral level. In fact, the discussion has taken us from a discussion not only of the public sector and public services, but actually pushed us to think about, in some ways, reclaiming the economy. And so I think that that is a challenge for us on the planning committee and all of us participating to figure out, what the differences are in those discussions and how they relate to one another. Many of the speakers address the challenges and work we're doing within our unions to move beyond our workplaces, take a role in our communities and society, to take on responsibility as working class organizations to defend and reclaim public services. So I really liked Edwin's comments, that they're trying to become a union that is not defending just the interests of teachers, but actually intervening in society about the education system that they want to see coming out of the crisis. And then I can see that that is echoed by some of our comments in the question and answers as well. Also, the last discussion about Post and the work being done by CUPW really spoke about the role of education of workers and the work this union is doing to re-envision the role that Post has to play in post-COVID society, while at the one hand, strengthening of the public delivery services, new role for them, but at the same time, organizing workers in the private sector to build solidarity and stop the race to the bottom. So we've been able to have a discussion on a global, national, sectoral, and then an internal union level about the direction that we need to move in, again, to reclaim public services and indeed important sectors of our economy. What we're going to do as the final part of our session now is to briefly discuss the draft statement of principles that was mentioned by Cornelia in the beginning, in the welcoming or introduction to the session. And so you have all, I think by now, seen this draft statement of principles. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will summarize it. The goal will be to get a broad sense from you if you can support the general direction of this statement. If we have general agreement, it is not a finalized document. We will continue discussion and work to improve, finalize the document, and then get commitments from not individuals but the unions participating in the Global Trade Union Assembly, so that we are actually moving towards a commitment about how we build a global movement to reclaim vital public services. So to summarize briefly, and I apologize that I'm doing this in English. I know it's hard when there's text to do the interpretation. The title for now is Commitment to Defend, Restore, and Re-envision Vital Public Services in the Post-COVID Era. It has three parts. The first part speaks about the COVID-19 moment, challenges and opportunities facing us in terms of vital public services in our societies, and the need to act to defend them and make them a more important part of our economies and societies. The second part of the statement, entitled The Need for High Quality, Innovative, Affordable, Democratic, Universal Public Services, puts forward a vision of what public services should look like in the post-COVID era. And so these public services, which include all of the ones that we spoke about and many more, must contribute to creating fairer, healthier, and more sustainable societies, including the reconciliation of work and family life, social and cultural life, promoting our development in a lot of realms. Public services have to be critical in the global response to the pandemic. They have to be financed in sustainable ways, including through progressive taxation systems with those who have more pay more. Public services must be seen as a universal right, and they should be designed, implemented in a truly democratic way, together with trade unions, user groups, social organizations, and meet the needs of people to strengthen communities and create a just society. Public services are vital for a transformative transition to a low carbon economy. So that's the vision. And then the last section, which is the most important, is about strengthening and building our movement. to reclaim public services, which says we must build our trade union strength in the public sector and then use that to jump off to a broader range of labor organizing. Our strategies have to go beyond workplaces and individual enterprises or occupational groups or forms of employment to build solidarity among workers on an industrial and class basis, make connections with communities, connect union power and political power. And to do this requires that we organize our unions based on this commitment as our commitment as social actors. And in part, this is about giving voice and power to the marginalized within our unions. That our strategy has to connect workplace and class organizing to other social, economic, and environmental justice issues, and that this should be the basis for our vision of how we democratize public services. It recognizes that we have to fight against intervention by global financial institutions and market logic, and this is important, we must redefine our approach to public services to include all services that meet general and universal needs of society. And these include, in addition to the ones mentioned on this call, housing, childcare, financial services, social services, food, telecommunications, and also to recognize the interconnection between these sectors. Finally, unions must organize around a global collective vision and strategy for integrating public services based on this declaration of principles and use global solidarity to build resistance within and between countries as part of a pro-public, global and worker-led political movement for recovery and reconstruction. So that's the draft. Unfortunately, we can't have a debate on it now, but we will find a way, hopefully, through the website to continue the debate. I just want to mention that, again, that in the draft, there were some, in the question and answer chat, there were some comments about this statement. I apologize if I missed some of them, but there were questions. Can the statement include more detail about how public services should be financed publicly, and also their role in addressing wage disparity? I think that is pretty easy. That's context, right? Financing there might be a debate around financing, but I think that can be mentioned. There was also a suggestion to expand the scope of these principles to include democratization of all enterprises, including in the private sector, and transition to a worker-controlled state. I will say the last one may be outside the scope of this statement. And we will have to have more of a discussion about if we can include discussion of democratization of all enterprises in the statement. But that is a discussion we can commit to having. So with those good points and a general, having presented the general gist of this draft statement of principles, what we are going to do now is ask you through an online poll if you agree with the general direction of the principles presented in the draft statement, which are about how we are going to together build a movement to defend and strengthen public services. And so we have a poll which says, do you agree with the general direction of these principles? Yes, no, I need more time to review the statement. You are not, if you say yes, you're agreeing to the direction and that this is a good idea and we should work on this statement to come up with something, hopefully by the end of the Trade Union Assembly, if not shortly thereafter, that our unions can commit to. And that will be a basis for us to continue to work together. So it's not, if there's a few wording issues or a few points that maybe you don't agree with, you can still agree with the general direction of the principles. So if you don't, then no. If you need more time, that's fine too. Please check that box. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer this poll, and then we will look at the results.
10 more seconds before we close the poll and post the results.
Okay, good. We have 85% of participants agree with the direction of these principles. We can work on them towards having a final conclusion that our unions can hopefully adopt. And we have 15% who need more time to review this statement, which is very understandable. And we have 0 no's, which is a really good thing. So I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we had a great discussion here. We will find a way to continue the discussion about the statement, perhaps on the website, and to move towards a more complete and final draft, which we can then present to our unions. So thank you very much. I know we're a little over time, but I just want to very quickly remind you that there are upcoming sessions on October 27th, Beyond Insecurity, on September 1, Extending Public Ownership and Democratic Control of Energy, on September 3, Making Austerity History, and the closing session, hopefully we will be able to present at least progress, if not a final draft of our statement of principles at the closing session on September 10th, Beyond the Pandemic, Trade Unions, Internationalism, and Movement Building. I'm just gonna give the mic to Sean for brief comments to give us a little bit more detail.
Great, thank you, Wolfsan. I hope comrades can hear me. Yeah, just want to reiterate what Wolfsan just said. We have an exciting session coming up, Beyond Insecurity, a new approach to work, wages, and wealth distribution, on Thursday. Please spread the word about that. We're lucky to have Barbara Figueroa, the head of the Central Union of Workers, the principal National Center in Chile, who will be opening up. And then we have trade unionists and informal worker organizations from Argentina, Chile, Hong Kong, Cambodia, Colombia, Uganda, and the UK. And I think anybody who follows the international labor scene knows how much inspiration and strength the informal workers organizations have brought to the trade union movement over the last decade or two. And for many, of course, many workers in the world, informal work and precarious work is the norm, and this is the working class in many parts of the world, and increasingly also in the richer global north countries. So we'll be hearing from workers from domestic services, agriculture, and other sectors. So we're looking forward to that session on Thursday, same time, but please spread the word and make sure that members and networks know about this session on Thursday. So I'll close there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That concludes our session. You can say goodbye in the Q&A chat if you'd like. And thank you very much for participating. I know it's late and early for some of you. We really appreciate it and hope to continue the conversation. Good night from Korea. Good day.
Thanks, everyone. We're going to show the video of the GTUA. And we'll leave the Q&A open if people want to type in goodbyes or greetings from wherever you are. And we'll have that open for about 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone.